Most people think of a homeowners association as nothing more than a group of retired neighbors arguing about lawn height and fence colors. But sometimes, just sometimes, HOAs become something far worse. They become a weapon, a tool of power-hungry men willing to do whatever it takes to control, intimidate, and steal. That's exactly what happened to Daniel Grayson. He lived alone on secluded land in Montana, far from city noise, far from rules, and far from anyone who could tell him what to do. But one morning, two men in black tactical vests marked HOA arrived at his doorstep, demanding he sign away his rights or face the consequences. But what these men didn't know was that Daniel wasn't alone. And when the sound of helicopter blades filled the sky, their faces turned from arrogance to pure terror. What happened next would shock everyone. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine as the sun slowly stretched over the rolling hills of Montana. Daniel Grayson took a slow sip of his black coffee, leaning back in his weathered porch chair. The world was still, silent, except for the distant chirping of birds waking with the dawn. This was why he had chosen to live out here. No noise, no neighbors, no problems. But that peace shattered the moment he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. Daniel's jaw tightened. He set his mug down and squinted toward the road. A black SUV, unmarked, tinted windows, moving with slow, deliberate confidence, rolled to a stop just beyond his front gate. Two men stepped out, their heavy boots thudding against the dirt. They wore black tactical vests, bold white letters stretched across the chest. HOA? Daniel frowned. That didn't make any sense. His land wasn't under any homeowners association. In fact, he had gone out of his way to avoid that nonsense when he bought this property. The taller of the two men, a broad-shouldered brute with shaved head and reflective aviators, took the lead. His stride was slow, calculated, like a man used to being in charge. The second man was shorter, stockier, his ruddy face twisted into a permanent scowl. Unlike his partner, he wasn't wearing sunglasses, and Daniel could see the cold amusement in his eyes. Daniel didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he let them come to him. The tall one stopped just a few feet away, hands on his belt, chest puffed like he was some high-ranking officer patrolling enemy territory. His voice was low, clipped, and dripping with the kind of authority that either came from years of real experience or from a man who had spent too much time pretending. Daniel Grayson. It wasn't a question. Daniel lifted his chin slightly. Who's asking? The man held up a clipboard, thick with papers. We're here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. This property is in violation of several HOA regulations, and you have exactly 1 week to bring it into compliance or vacate. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. His grip tightened around the armrest of his chair. Here we go. Slowly he stood, taking his time, letting them see the solid, unmoving set of his shoulders. He was taller than the short one, but just under the brute's height. Didn't matter. His stance was unshaken. He reached for the clipboard, scanning the document. No letterhead, no official state seal, nothing legal about it. Just pages of bogus violations, threats of fines, penalties, and eviction, all wrapped up in a lot of fancy legal jargon meant to intimidate. He flicked his gaze up to the shorter man, who grinned when he saw Daniel's expression shift. Daniel handed the clipboard back. This is a joke. The taller one sighed impatiently, shoving the clipboard back toward him. Sign it, Grayson. This is not a negotiation. Daniel let the silence stretch between them. He took a slow step forward, eyes locked on the brute. I'm not part of an HOA. The shorter man chuckled, shaking his head. That doesn't matter. The association has recently expanded jurisdiction over this area, which means, he gestured toward the clipboard, this is official. Daniel smiled coldly. No, it's not. The tall one stiffened. The shorter man's grin widened. The air shifted. A silent warning. A line drawn in the dirt. Daniel felt his pulse slow, steady. He could read people, always have been good at it. These weren't paper pushers. They weren't here to argue about fence heights and mailbox colors. No, this was intimidation. A shakedown. and the way the tall one's hand drifted toward his hip, fingers grazing the outline of a holstered gun, made it clear. This wasn't just business. This was a threat. Daniel didn't move. He just stared at the man whose fingers hovered near his gun. This was it. The moment where words stopped mattering. The tall one squared his shoulders, tilting his head just slightly, like he was already calculating his next move. "I'll make this simple," the brute said, his voice calm, but loaded with something dark. "Sign the damn papers, Grayson. Otherwise, things get messy." Daniel let a slow smirk curl at the edge of his lips. "Messy, huh?" He took a deliberate step forward, closing the gap between them. "I'd love to see you try." The shorter one laughed under his breath, but there was an edge of frustration in it. He glanced at his partner. "This guy doesn't get it." "No," the brute replied, his sunglasses reflecting the early morning light. "I think he does. I just don't think he's very smart." Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, playing his feet like a mountain refusing to move. "I think we're done here." The brute's lips pressed into a tight line of irritation. He took a breath, about to speak, then changed his mind. Instead, he turned and walked back to the SUV. The shorter man lingered, grinning. "You might want to rethink this, old man," he said, his voice almost amused. "You don't want to make us come back." Daniel's smile disappeared. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His next words were low, calm, and sharp as a blade. "If you step foot on my land again—" He tilted his head. "You won't be leaving it." The shorter man's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then he turned, climbing into the SUV. The black vehicle rumbled to life, kicking up dust and gravel as it pulled away, disappearing down the winding road. Daniel stood there, watching, his heartbeat steady. They thought they could scare him. They thought he'd just roll over. They had no idea what was coming next. The morning air was still cool and crisp, but inside, Daniel's blood was starting to simmer. He stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching the dust settle from the HOA thugs' departure. They weren't done. He knew it, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel wasn't some clueless homeowner in a cookie-cutter neighborhood. He had chosen this land for a reason. No rules, no interference, just freedom. But now, some fake HOA thugs were trying to take it from him with phony documents and loaded threats. Not happening. He walked inside, locked the door, and grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter. His fingers moved fast as he scrolled through his contacts. Then he tapped a name. Captain Reynolds. The call rang once, twice. Then a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Grayson, what's going on?" Daniel exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "Looks like I've got a problem, Captain. Some guys rolled up in black vests marked HOA. Said I had 48 hours to sign my land over." A pause. Then Reynolds spoke again, his voice like steel. "That's so." "Yeah. And get this, I checked with the county clerk. No official HOA in my district. This is a scam." Another silence. Then a quiet chuckle. "They don't know who they're messing with, do they?" "Nope." "You armed?" Daniel glanced toward the gun safe in the corner of the room. He didn't need to answer that. "Good," Reynolds said. "Stay put. Keep eyes on the property. If they come back, don't engage unless you have to. I'll make some calls." Daniel nodded to himself. "Copy that." The line went dead. Daniel set his phone down, but the tension in his chest remained. He could feel it, that electric charge before a storm. He walked over to the window, staring out at the empty road, watching, waiting. Something told him these men weren't going to wait 48 hours. Something told him tonight was going to be a long night. The night came silent and thick, the kind that made the woods feel deeper, the shadows darker. Daniel sat in his living room, one hand wrapped around a hot mug of coffee, the other resting near the loaded shotgun beside him. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m. when he heard it, a soft metallic snap. Not a natural sound, not the wind, not an animal. Someone was at his fence. Daniel set his coffee down slowly, careful not to make a sound. He moved toward the window, keeping his body in the shadows. Outside, under the dim glow of the moon, Figures move along the fence line. At least 3, maybe 4. His jaw tightened. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. One of them crouched near the freshly repaired section of fence, a pair of bolt cutters glinting in his hands. Another figure was standing nearby, scanning the tree line, a rifle slung across his chest, armed. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was war. Daniel exhaled slowly and reached for his phone. He tapped a single name, Reynolds. The call rang once. That was all it took. "Talk to me," Reynolds answered, voice alert despite the late hour. "They're here." A pause. "Then how many?" "4. Armed. Cutting the fence." Reynolds cursed under his breath. "I'm 10 minutes out. Hold tight." Daniel's fingers tightened around the shotgun grip. "Not sure they're going to give me 10 minutes, Captain." There was no answer this time. Just the distant roar of an approaching helicopter. Daniel smirked. The cavalry was coming. Daniel stayed low, pressing himself against the wall near the window. His pulse drummed in his ears as he watched the men outside. The one with the bolt cutters finished snapping through the fence, nudging it open just wide enough to slip through. Then came the voice, low, amused, cocky. "Told you he'd patch it up." Didn't take long. Daniel recognized that voice. Clancy, the tall one, the one who had nearly drawn on him the first time they met. He clenched his jaw. Clancy wasn't here to talk. Another man, stockier and carrying a sawed-off shotgun, chuckled darkly. "Yeah, well, maybe this time he gets a message." The men moved toward the house, slow and deliberate. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was an attack. Daniel took a steady breath and cocked the shotgun. The sound echoed through the quiet night, like a thunderclap. The men outside froze. "What the hell was that?" one of them muttered. Daniel stepped forward, throwing the front door wide open. The porch light flicked on, bathing the yard in a harsh glow. He raised a shotgun, aiming right at Clancy's chest. "Move another inch, and I swear to God, I'll drop you where you stand." For the first time, Clancy hesitated. The shorter man raised his weapon slightly, but Daniel shifted the shotgun toward him. "Don't," Daniel warned, voice cold as steel. For a few tense seconds, no one moved. The night air was thick with the weight of the standoff. Then came a new sound, a distant roar growing louder by the second. Clancy turned his head toward the sky. The moment he did, Daniel smiled, because the National Guard was here. The night split open with a deafening thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades. A spotlight flared to life, sweeping across the property like the eye of God himself had turned its gaze on the intruders. The Black Hawk hovered just above the treetops, its downdraft kicking up dirt and leaves as it ripped through the quiet night. Daniel saw Clancy's face change, the arrogance wiped clean, replaced by something colder. Calculation. Panic. "What the hell?" One of the men stammered, stepping back, his grip tightening on his weapon. Then the convoy arrived. 3 Humvees stormed up the driveway, high beams flooding the yard with blinding light. Doors burst open, and soldiers in full tactical gear poured out, rifles raised, voices sharp and commanding. "Drop your weapons. Hands in the air now." Clancy's men froze. Daniel didn't move his shotgun, his breathing steady. He had called in every favor he had left, and it paid off. Clancy's jaw ticked, his hands flexing. For a moment, Daniel thought he might go for his gun. "Don't be stupid." Daniel called over the roar of the helicopter. "You lost." Clancy smirked. "We'll see about that." Then he ran. Clancy bolted. He spun on his heel and lunged toward the tree line, his boots kicking up dirt as he ran. His men stood frozen for a half second, just long enough for the National Guard to descend on them. Soldiers tackled 2 of them to the ground, weapons clattering as they were yanked into submission. Another tried to reach for his gun. Bad mistake. A single warning shot from a soldier's rifle sent him dropping to his knees, hands raised. But Clancy? He was fast. Too fast. Daniel took off after him, adrenaline slamming through his veins like fire. "He's running west, toward the ridge," a soldier called into his radio. The Black Hawk swiveled, its spotlight locking onto Clancy as he crashed through the underbrush, arms pumping. He was aiming for the woods, where the darkness could swallow him whole. "You're not getting away that easy," Daniel muttered, pushing harder. The air was thick with tension. Every breath sharpened Daniel's lungs. He heard the snap of branches, the pounding of boots against damp earth. Then, a second spotlight flared to life. Another chopper. Clancy skidded to a stop, panting, chest heaving as the light swallowed him. His hands twitched toward his waistband. "Don't do it," Daniel shouted, shotgun raised. For a moment, Clancy just stood there, calculating. Then he grinned and reached for his gun. Clancy's fingers closed around the grip of his gun. But before he could raise it, a single deafening shot rang out. Dirt exploded near his feet, and he jerked back, his balance faltering. From above, the Black Hawk's loudspeaker thundered through the trees. "Drop the weapon. Hands in the air now." Daniel didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in a flash, slamming into Clancy with the full force of his momentum. They crashed to the ground, rolling over the damp earth in a tangled, brutal struggle. Clancy fought like a wild animal, his elbows driving into Daniel's ribs, his knee twisting upward in a desperate attempt to break free. Daniel gritted his teeth, muscles burning as he wrestled Clancy's arm down, pinning him beneath his weight. The gun slipped from Clancy's grasp, landing a few feet away with a heavy thud. Clancy snarled, his breath ragged, but Daniel wasn't letting up. He drove his forearm into Clancy's throat, keeping him in place as boots thundered toward them. Soldiers swarmed the scene, rifles locked onto the man beneath Daniel. The familiar sound of zip ties tightening filled the air, and within seconds, Clancy's wrists were yanked behind his back, his struggles turning to furious, labored breaths. Daniel pushed himself up, chest heaving, staring down at the man who had tried to steal everything from him. Clancy met his gaze, eyes still burning with that dangerous arrogance. "You think this is over?" he hissed, his voice low and sharp. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaling slowly. He leaned in just enough, so Clancy could hear him clearly over the chopper blades. "Yeah," he said, voice like steel. "It is." Two soldiers hauled Clancy to his feet, dragging him toward one of the waiting Humvees. His boots scraped against the dirt, his resistance pointless. The last of his men were already secured, their weapons confiscated, their plan completely obliterated. Daniel stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, watching as they were driven away. The tension in his chest eased, just a little. The land was still his. His home was still standing. And Clancy? He was finally where he belonged, in chains. The Humvees rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust as they disappeared beyond the tree line. The sound of the Black Hawk's blades gradually faded, leaving behind a heavy, eerie silence. Daniel stood at the edge of his land, watching them go, feeling the weight of everything settle into his chest. It was over. For now. Captain Reynolds stepped beside him, his face still sharp with focus, but there was a hint of relief in his expression. He removed his helmet, running a gloved hand through his damp hair. "Hell of a fight you put up, Carter." Daniel let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "Didn't feel like I had a choice." Reynolds smirked, popping open the strap on his vest. "Most people wouldn't have fought at all. They'd have signed the damn paper, given in, and let guys like Clancy take what they wanted." Daniel clenched his jaw, staring out at the land he'd nearly lost. The fence was still splintered. Tire tracks were dug deep into the soil, and pieces of demolished security cameras still littered the ground. They had come so close to tearing his life apart, but they failed. Reynolds' voice broke through the quiet. "They're going to federal lockup. Clancy's looking at least 20 years. Maybe more if the feds dig deeper into his operation. His men are rolling over on him already." Daniel scoffed, crossing his arms. "Cowards. They were ready to take my land by force, and now they're throwing each other under the bus the second things go south." Reynolds nodded knowingly. "That's how guys like that work. They talk big when they've got power, but take that away, they crumble." Daniel exhaled, trying to let the tension drain from his shoulders, but something inside him wouldn't let go. The fight was over, but the unease? It remained. He could still see Clancy smirk through the Humvee's tinted window, still hear his voice, dripping with menace. "This isn't over." Daniel turned toward Reynolds, his voice low. Clancy's not the type to let this go, is he? Reynolds' smirk faded. He studied Daniel for a long moment, then sighed. No, he's not. A chill crawled up Daniel's spine. He'd won the battle. But was the war really over? 1 week had passed since the standoff, but the unease hadn't left Daniel's chest. The land was quiet again, almost too quiet. The fence had been repaired, the security system upgraded, and every trace of Clancy and his crew had been wiped from his property. But Daniel knew better than to believe it was truly over. He stood on his porch, beer in hand, watching the sunset bleed across the Tennessee hills. The world around him was untouched, peaceful, but in the back of his mind, he could still hear the roar of the Blackhawks' blades, the sharp snap of zip ties locking around Clancy's wrists. Men like that didn't just disappear. A pair of headlights flickered in the distance, growing brighter as a pickup truck rolled into his driveway. Daniel smirked when he saw the driver, Captain Reynolds, still half-dressed in his National Guard uniform, a six-pack of beer dangling from one hand. "Figured you could use one of these," Reynolds said, stepping out and holding up the drinks. Daniel chuckled, grabbing a bottle. "You always know what a guy needs." Reynolds popped the cap off his own and sat on the porch steps beside him. "You all patched up?" Daniel nodded, glancing toward the newly reinforced fence. "Better than before." Reynolds took a slow sip, then exhaled. "Clancy's crew is done for. The feds are pressing charges: extortion, fraud, impersonating an officer, illegal weapons possession. He's looking at 20 years minimum." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And the others?" "Most of them caved the second they got into interrogation," Reynolds said with a smirk. "They gave up names, locations, everything. Turns out, Clancy wasn't just running a scam. He was part of a multi-state real estate fraud ring. They'd target homeowners in rural areas, bully them into signing their land away, and then flip the properties for massive profits." Daniel clenched his jaw. "And the people they forced out?" Reynolds' smirk faded. He looked away for a moment before speaking. "We're still figuring that out. Some moved, some disappeared. A couple of families in Kentucky vanished last year after refusing to sign over their land." A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. "And nobody did anything?" Reynolds shook his head. "It's easy to cover your tracks when you've got money and power, until someone fights back." Daniel exhaled sharply, staring out the land he'd nearly lost. They thought they could take whatever they wanted. They counted on people being afraid. Reynolds smirked again. "Yeah, well, they picked the wrong guy." They sat in silence for a while, drinking their beers as the sky darkened. The crickets were loud tonight, the kind of loud that made the world feel normal again. But Daniel couldn't shake the nagging feeling deep in his gut. He turned toward Reynolds, voice low. "Clancy's not the type to just let this go, is he?" Reynolds' smirk disappeared completely. His eyes darkened, and he took a slow sip of his beer before speaking. "No, he's not." Daniel's grip tightened around the bottle. "If he gets out—" "He's not getting out," Reynolds said firmly. "Not this time. He crossed the wrong people." Daniel wanted to believe that, but he remembered the look Clancy gave him, the kind of look that promised revenge. Reynolds seemed to read his thoughts. He clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder, squeezing it firmly. "Look, you're not alone anymore. You've got backup now. If anything happens, you know who to call." Daniel exhaled slowly. He knew Reynolds was right. But deep down, he also knew something else. Men like Clancy never truly go away. They sat there in silence as the last of the light faded behind the hills, the land stretching out before them. Still his, still untouched. But if anyone ever came back to take it from him, they wouldn't live long enough to regret it. As the last of the sunlight faded into the horizon, Daniel sat back against the porch railing, letting the cool night air settle around him. The fight was over, for now. The fence was fixed, the land was his, and Clancy and his crew were locked away where they belonged. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the kind of battle that ever truly ended. Men like Clancy, they didn't forget. They didn't let things go. They bided their time, waiting, planning, looking for a way back. Daniel took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes scanning the darkened tree line at the edge of his property. Tonight, the land was quiet. But he wasn't naive. If another fight came, he'd be ready. Reynolds glanced at him and smirked. "You're thinking too much." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Just making sure I don't get too comfortable." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Good. That's how you stay ahead." The two men clinked their bottles together in a silent toast before settling into the stillness of the night. This land was his, and no one was ever taking it from him again.